好吧，在另一个宇宙中，在
Alright, so in an alternate universe where the primary demographic in Imperial China has transformed from Han Chinese to the Yao Guai, a great evil has arisen in the east for unknown reason and possessed the Lich King's persona in an attempt to take over China and then presumably the rest of the world. Could not tell you where the Hong Kong-based developers got an idea of an anthropomorphic bear taking over the world came from, but I'm sure the concept will land with some more than others. Generic unplaceable evil being an ever-effective call to action, heroes both spiritual and physical emerge from every corner of China to do battle against said darkness. Under the guidance of the jovial bartending panda Uncle Bao, you and up to 3 other allies can choose from 6 powerful warriors with which you will contest Arthas and his armies in order to save all of Azeroth. I've been playing Gunfire Reborn on and off with the boys from 206 back when Duoyi Games included only 3 playable characters at the time. With its 1.0 release in November of 2021, the game has really come into its own. It doesn't do anything innovative for the FPS genre, but there's something to be said about developing and delivering an all-around competent shooter.
You can't kill the immortal, Crane. Dude,
Are you fucking serious?
You fucking Goombas.
Your personal journey to the west begins here, in Uncle Bao's Inn, where the liquor flows freely like a waterfall and the tea tastes like something Uncle Ira would pour you a cup of.
Hot leaf juice!
Uncle Bao's Inn, or as the locals like to call it, Iga Tai Dan, is going to be your staging ground. This is going to be where you choose your character and assemble your party before departing on an adventure. The cast of characters you can choose from are unique in their preferred method to dispatch their enemies. Though the gunplay is the thread that weaves our motley crew of anthropomorphic heroes together, they are all wildly different in their skill set. Generally speaking, you're going to be using a marksman, a martial artist, or a mix of both. The Crown Prince is the first hero available to everyone, a mysterious visitor from the spirit realm armed with poisonous smoke grenades and the ability to freeze enemies in place with his energy orb. He is defined by his mastery over the elements, fire, corrosion, and lightning. By combining these elements together alongside his stunning energy blasts, he can manipulate the movements of his enemies, establishing tactical dominance over the battlefield. Outbai is a master of explosives and firearms. Given his affinity for ranged weaponry, he can bury his enemies in a hail of gunpowder, whether it be by bullet or by bomb. He is the only hero capable of dual-wielding guns, effectively doubling his damage output at minimum. With a gun in each hand, Ao Bai intends to blast apart any evildoer foolish enough to stand against him. Qing Yun is an expert martial artist that prefers to fight his enemies face to face, whether that's through his martial prowess or through the wrong end of a boomstick. Capable of leaping to his quarry from afar before cleaving them into pieces, Qing Yun makes quick work of anyone that enters his hunting grounds. Lei Luo is the de facto sniper of Gunfire Reborn. Born with the ability to manipulate lightning, he can shock his enemies from afar through bolts of chained lightning, or he can enshroud himself with a current of electricity, enhancing his physical capabilities and his already superb marksmanship. Tal is a hero defined by her uptime. With her ability to summon spiritual swords and mark enemies with fatal bloom, she gets more dangerous the more ammo she expends. For every bullet shot at an enemy, she continuously stores spiritual energy before unleashing it all in a flurry of summoned swords that slash and stab away at her foes with deadly accuracy. Qian Sui is the most recent addition to Gunfire Reborn and is another close-range fighter. Utilizing the element of water, he is capable of generating an impenetrable shield called the Tidal Aspis, rendering him completely invulnerable from the front. Using the Aspis, he hurls himself towards his enemies at great speeds. Armed with nothing more than his fist, he batters his enemies into submission with an endless flurry of blows. There's a lot more to unpack when it comes to the nuance of our heroes, but we'll leave it there for the time being. For now, it's best to assemble our 4 pilgrims and then depart on our expedition. Gunfire plays like a cohesive amalgamation of other shooters you've experienced before, tied together into a neat roguelite package. A foundation of satisfying gunplay juxtaposed by deliberate floaty movement, which is enhanced through light RPG and roguelite elements. When it comes to gameplay, so much of Gunfire Reborn takes its cues from all kinds of looter shooters, Borderlands, Destiny, etc, etc, etc. From the numbers that are shot out of enemies to the ability-based gameplay, you can't help but notice the similarities. You can hold up to 3 weapons, one of which is a sidearm with infinite ammo. You have a dedicated ability button and a grenade, or as the game likes to call it, a secondary skill button, which is usually a grenade. You have a dash to evade enemy projectiles. It's everything any looter shooter fan would be happy to see. Where things diverge mechanically, and where I personally feel that Gunfire excels in, is in its weapon feedback. I've always felt that a lot of ability shooters were fairly light when it came to weapon impact. They tend to front-load most of that feedback into the spellcasting as opposed to the gunplay. One notable exception being Destiny 2, shooting and spellcasting in that game fucks. In this instance, Duo-E Games has opted to foreground their weapons by presenting you with an arsenal that is fun to use and feels good using. It's a little extra panache they sprinkle onto their game that makes you excited to try out a new gun. With 40 plus weapons to unlock and arm yourself with, you and your party will not be found lacking when it comes to armaments as you blast your way across Imperial China. Every expedition in the game consists of 3 to 4 acts separated into several stages before culminating into one of 2 climactic boss fights. In order, the 4 acts are Longling Tomb, Anxi Desert, Duo Fjord, and finally the Hyperborean Jokuul. Every area is distinct from each other, bearing their own aesthetic and their own unique enemy faction to fight. Longling Tomb, being the first of the acts, is also the most linear. A vast underground complex of trapped corridors interrupted every so often by large arenas. Stationed around every nook and cranny of the tomb are terracotta soldiers awoken back into service by the demonic aura. Crossbowmen, golems, and even crazed gunpowder-wielding bombers will be the first of many trials in your journey. Anxi Desert is when the game starts to open up physically. Unlike the claustrophobic halls of Longling Tomb, the Anxi Desert features wide stretches of sandy rocky dunes and tall hamlets for you to battle in. An army of bandits composed of the worst the desert has to offer stand between you and Duo Fjord. Duo Fjord features treacherous terrain, beachside villages, and coastal combat topped off with a stormy night for some pleasant mise-en-scène. A faction of Asiatic, slightly less inbred deep ones from the Cthulhu mythos, with a cameo appearance of Roadhog's Asian cousin, act as the penultimate faction before arriving at the source of the demonic aura. The Hyperborean Jokuul, or as it is translated in English, the Frozen Throne, is the home base of the Pole Monarch. Here our anthropomorphic bear allegory rests at the top of the Jokuul, attempting to corrupt the World Stone. The Monarch's personal guard of kung fu flipping monkeys, hostile Arctic life, and even the Draenei seek to stop your siege on the Lich King's stronghold. But whether it's Act 1 or Act 4, you'll conquer your enemies all the same, fighting from room to room, dismantling wave after wave of enemies as you progress through each stage. Navigate your way past the traps and survive the skirmishes against the enemy, and you'll be presented opportunities to bolster your fighting prowess via various power-ups. These power-ups manifest as weapon drops, occult scrolls, and golden goblets. If you've seen them once, you've seen them 1,000 times. Weapon drops are functionally the same like in any other shooter. You've got 8 categories to choose from, totaling out to 48 weapons you can shoot, blast, or slash apart your enemies with. Every weapon has its core stats based on the category it lies in. Furthermore, every weapon can come with modifiers, or inscriptions, which can significantly impact a weapon's performance. You can get a simple inscription that merely modifies the core stats of a weapon. Or you could get an inscription that allows you to potentially kill an enemy on any headshot. Scrolls are the item loot equivalent from Risk of Rain, and just like Risk of Rain, their impact is dependent on the rarity of the scroll and what power-ups you already have. They can be bought, looted, rewarded, and even shared amongst your comrades. But what you can't do is stack your scrolls. You can only ever have one copy of a scroll at a time, or its corresponding upgraded variant. This piece of parchment tends to encourage and emphasize certain qualities of your build that are dictated by the weapons you find and the goblets you collect. More on this later. It's rare for a scroll to carry your playthrough. They're there to optimize the foundation set up by your weapon and goblet choices. In addition to that, scrolls are a consistent source of defensive enhancement regardless of what character you're playing. So many scrolls you find can increase your survivability and mobility that it's not uncommon for people to choose defensive scrolls over offensive ones. Golden goblets are the most consistent and possibly the most important power-up you'll receive in Gunfire Reborn, because you're guaranteed one at the end of every stage. Goblets allow a hero to ascend. Ascensions are the enhancement and evolution of your character's abilities. When a goblet is acquired, you are offered a choice of 3 random upgrades unique to your character's ascension list. Some ascensions can be chosen multiple times, while some can only be chosen once. Depending on the character you're playing, your ascensions have the capacity to completely overhaul how your particular hero functions. Let's take Tal, for instance. You can build Tal in a way where she does what she does, but just better. You could potentially build Tal in a way where you'll be spamming her secondary ability more than her primary. Or, you could build Tal in a way where you never cast abilities and you just hold down the shoot button. This is it. What you're seeing on screen is what we're here for. This is Apex Roguelite gameplay here. That ethereal drive to assemble an effective build is the primary hook for this game. One of the things that Gunfire Reborn does really well with the roguelite genre is how it physically and visually manifests your strength. The results are comparable, but how it feels to wield and express that power can be vastly different and yet satisfying all the same. Whether you're an actual bullet hose, a lightning-fast martial artist, or a spell-slinging sorcerer, if there is one thing Gunfire gets right, it's how it lets you express your power level. Now, remember that this game is a roguelite at the end of the day, so there are going to be some issues with consistency. What the fuck?!
Oh my god.
Alright, someone on this team is cosmetic!
Amazing.
Try to explain the 28 feints.
Sorry, I can't hear you over my doing twice as much damage.
Did not do twice as much.
I did by the end of it.
Attempting to go for a build generally results in diminished efficacy because you're trying to force something as opposed to being adaptable. You may not be able to get consistent builds, but you can have a consistent performance by understanding the nuance of how your weapon, your scrolls, and your goblet choices affect each other. If you understand what your hero is good at and make the best of the hand dealt to you, then you can get far in any expedition you play. But just because you'll go far doesn't mean you'll finish. I mean, come on guys, what did I say earlier? This is a roguelite and there are 100% going to be runs where you'll fail because you were unlucky. Oh. You're so bad!
I didn't see there was
Shit!
You're bad.
But whether you make it all the way to the end of an expedition or your run ends prematurely, not everything is lost upon death or completion. When a run ends, you are presented with the final method with which to empower your heroes via the universal talent tree. Through the use of a separate currency called soul fragments, you can invest into the various trees in order to improve your chances at beating the next run. Their utility ranges from convenient to necessary. Some of these talents are practically required in higher difficulties, or you are seriously handicapping yourself. All in all, Gunfire Reborn has a focused feedback loop that ties into itself exceptionally well, from its gameplay to its secondary elements. However, when you have such a concentrated feedback loop, any kind of blemish is really going to stand out. One of the biggest gameplay issues that emerge are boss fights. Boss fights in Gunfire Reborn are the weakest parts of the game only because their novelty wears thin exceptionally fast. They function exactly how you would expect a boss to operate in any ability shooter. All bosses have a large health pool, but have a weak spot you can take advantage of. They can typically summon adds mid-fight. They have a high damage AoE attack that needs to be dealt with one way or another. They have multiple phases, which intensifies the current situation, or presents a new one forcing you to readjust your strategy. All solid fundamental concepts used in any good boss fight. But I think the problem with boss fights in Gunfire Reborn stem from how binary the solutions are in battle, especially Acts 1 and 2. Once you've figured out how to deal with the bosses and their attack patterns, a lot of the tension and engagement vanishes in the encounter. Now, of course, this is the natural life cycle of fun when it comes to boss design, which is at odds with the inherent design of roguelites. I do feel, though, that the developers recognize this issue because the bosses they included towards the end of the game's early access period address most of the aforementioned complaints. The Abyssal Serpent is functionally no different than, say, the Golem or the Ichthyosaurus offspring. But it feels more fun to fight by comparison because it's more mechanically intense and yet avoids treading into unfair territory. The Yoruhime Maru and the Pole Monarch introduce bullet hell mechanics that require your attention or you're inevitably going to be overwhelmed. The Monarch himself introduces a DPS check that heralds the end of a run if you and your party don't focus him down fast enough when he's in this phase.
No shot! We lose!
We lost.
I don't know what the fuck's happening! Dude!
Oh, well, goodbye, everyone.
He's activated his 8th gate Bankai!
I feel like if more of these mechanics were incorporated into the older bosses, it would be healthier overall for design direction and replayability. I recognize, however, that the Act 1 and 2 bosses are teaching you the mechanics so that you're not blindsided by the intensity of Act 3 and 4. The thing is, you're gonna be seeing these guys often and they don't change much from one encounter to the next, even on higher difficulties. All that really happens is an increase in attack speed and attack damage, but by the time you're able to fight bosses at this level, then this should be a relatively trivial encounter for you. So my suggestion would be that you incorporate some of the mechanics from Acts 3 and 4 into 1 and 2 as reincarnation exclusive. There's already a precedent of reincarnation exclusive content, so why not spice things up even more by having reincarnation exclusive boss mechanics? The Golem could have bullet hell related mechanics similar to that of the Yoruhime Maru or Pole Monarch. Perhaps he could send out a constant stream of slow moving spiked rocks that you have to dodge while avoiding his usual attacks. The Wind God could have melee attacks that function similarly to the Monarch's sword swipes that need to be avoided, while simultaneously offering more opportunities to damage his weak spot. These are just some suggestions off the top of my head. But say the developers opt to forge onward with new bosses instead of reworking the old ones. Then as long as they follow the design direction they laid out for themselves with the bosses from Act 3 and 4, I'm fairly confident that any new boss they add will strike that balance of compelling, challenging, and fair. As much as I would love to have my criticism end at the bosses, there are unfortunately some other issues with the game that are hard to ignore. Nothing so intrusive that they'd kill your enjoyment, but you still can't help but notice their presence. Audio balancing and mixing is probably the most notable one in this case. Generally speaking, it's fine, for the most part. Most of the issues related to audio stem from the characters themselves. It's either odd or off. Sometimes characters will sound like they're right in your ears regardless of their position relative to you. Sometimes they don't make any noise when they're supposed to. Sometimes they're just weirdly louder than everything else despite whatever adjustments you make in the options. Also, on the topic of audio, the OST is some of the most room temperature, royalty-free, milquetoast placeholder sounding ass music I think I've ever heard. It is so bizarre how everything else in the game aesthetically has a lot of charm drawn from 5,000 years of history, and yet this game somehow finds a way to compose together the most mundane combination of harmonic frequencies to accompany their action-packed game. Another criticism I have is related to the RPG mechanics, specifically the talent tree. Gunfire Reborn likes to take a lot of inspiration from other games.
I wonder where they got this idea. Couldn't be Overwatch.
They do a good job of taking ideas and putting their own spin on it, whether they do it visually or mechanically. But they don't do anything really interesting with the talent tree, and so it falls flat. 90% of the talents are shared amongst your other characters. Some talents feel like they shouldn't even be talents, they feel like abilities you should already have access to from the get-go. And finally, the biggest issue is that the implementation of the talent tree is so one-dimensional. There are plenty of roguelites out there that incorporate talent trees, but they go beyond that initial layer of empowerment and offer you multiple ways to tune your character. I don't really know what you can do to fix the issue of implementation other than another full-blown rework. With the way the talent tree is set up now, it ensures that every character in the game is viable at the hardest difficulty. But on the other hand, a homogenized talent tree in a game with a short feedback loop tends to actualize as you gimping the player's strength instead of offering unique ways of empowering the player. That feeling of empowerment is primarily taken care of by the roguelite and character design, which makes this feel tacked on. One other gameplay-related criticism I have is that I think the difficulty for Acts 2 and 3 could use some more fine-tuning and reincarnation. I feel that the mid-game for a reincarnation run is bogged down by some monotony. From what I can tell, Acts 2 and 3 have this difficulty spike that results in a tedious experience whether you succeed or fail. Either you have a solid build by the end of Act 1 and you can just cruise control until Act 4, or you're underpowered and everything takes forever to kill. It's just a slog to play through either way.
Hit this arsonist right now.
Oh my god, I am doing no damage at all.
No lucky shots, no good scrolls,
Fuck.
no good golden goblets, nothing.
Yeah.
Acts 1 and 4 work great in Reincarnation because they strike that perfect balance of power and danger that keep you engaged, especially Act 4. You're powerful enough that everything can be killed in a reasonable time frame, but one momentary lapse of concentration and you're the one getting nuked instead.
No.
Oh my god.
Operation Save the Carry, boys! Ah!
The squishy.
The problem with Act 4 is that it's short in comparison to everything else and the experience is over fairly quickly, leaving you a bit unsatisfied. My hope is that the devs can take some time to look into the difficulty tuning of Act 2 and 3 Reincarnation so that they feel more in line with how Act 1 and 4 plays, resulting in a more consistent and engaging experience overall. Finally, there are some minor things here and there that don't really impact the game but are worth mentioning. English localization? Not the best. You can still definitely decipher it and get all the key information needed on your first read-through, but if you went out of your way to examine the prose, then you'd for sure detect some irregularities. On the topic of story, with the exception of an info dump at the very beginning and at the very end, there is no real story to speak of. You can get some lore here and there from the archives, but nothing really substantial that resembles a cohesive narrative beyond, great evil has arisen, go and stop it. Which is fine, I'll give the game a pass. You're not playing a game like this for a deep and intricate narrative. It's fine, it's fine. I know it seems like the issues I have with the game are extensive, but even when you take into account some of the more major issues with the game, I want to assure you that my complaints account for a minor portion of the excellent gameplay experience. Whatever hangups I have with Gunfire Reborn, there is no denying that when all is said and done, you still have a fantastic roguelite FPS game awaiting you. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Gunfire Reborn foregrounds that adage beautifully. Satisfying gameplay supplemented with an array of fun weapons and abilities are elegantly combined with a comprehensive roguelite system. An interplay between Gunfire's roguelite mechanics give the players the perfect amount of freedom and structure to develop incredibly powerful and creative builds that are a blast to use when all the pieces fall into place. The short and cyclical nature of the game's feedback loop and the unique cast of characters encourage a ton of replayability. And, to top it all off, the developers are already hard at work prototyping future content. The time I spent playing this game and the amount of fun I've had with it is way more than what you'd expect a $20 game can offer you. I've more than made my money back with Gunfire Reborn, and this is an easy recommendation from me, on sale or otherwise. The developers did a fantastic job from start to finish with Gunfire Reborn, and I can't wait to see what they have planned for the future. So you know how I said in the Rhythm Doctor video that I don't make videos on early access games? I was actually specifically referring to Gunfire Reborn. Around the time I released the Lobotomy Corporation video, the anniversary of which was the 3rd of this month, I was bouncing ideas back and forth between my friends trying to figure out what to make next. Naturally, Gunfire Reborn entered the conversation, but it was in early access at the time, so I opted to shelve that concept until its full release, and now here we are. On the topic of early access, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and abolish that rule. There's a ton of great early access games out there that I would love to make a video on, and this weird limitation I'm putting on myself is doing me no favors. Some quick updates with me in the channel. This video took a lot longer to produce than anticipated. The reason why is because I got sick not once, but twice at the start of the year. Thankfully it wasn't COVID, but it still put me out of commission for pretty much all of January and most of February. Being sick also stopped me from streaming, but with the video done and me overcoming my illness, I should be good to go. Anyway, that's gonna be it for me for now. Be sure to check out my other socials, Twitter, Twitch, and Patreon, and if you do check out my Patreon, pledge if you can. I'd really appreciate it. Other than that, thank you for watching. I sincerely hope you've all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!